The offense didn't do enough. The defense showed up. That's the story. The defense was good enough. The offense simply was not. That's the story of the Mountaineers' loss today. WVU's lost to Texas 17-13. The Mountaineers now 4-3 on the year, while the Texas Longhorns are now 5-2 as they continue their trek to turn things around for their Big 12 season. I'm your host, Mike Asti, and this is the West Virginia Mountaineers postgame show here on Pittsburgh Sports Live and, of course, WV Sports Now. I'm going to be joined alongside my beat guy, Cody Nespor, here in a matter of moments here as he finishes things up with those postgame press conferences and get you all that postgame coverage again over there at WV Sports Now. The Mountaineers lose, and it's a bitter pill to swallow the way they lost, because this offense couldn't get going. This offense had Jarret Doege throw 50 passes in this game, 35 completions, but 50 pass attempts. Leddie Brown, their featured back guy who's really emerged this season to carry that running game, never got going. He just never was able to get going, and that was an issue for this team. He had that outburst there, and many are calling it an outburst and criticizing him. But I feel like there's a major difference between a guy who's trying to blame his teammates and show up his coaches versus a guy like Leddie Brown, who was frustrated and trying to motivate others. You could read his lips there. He wanted to be better. He wanted to know what was wrong. He wanted the team to pick it up. He's become a leader of this team, but 40-some yards on the ground, an average of 3.1 per. Had a 12-yard run, so you take that away, it's even under 3. Only 15 carries. The recipe for the Mountaineers offense needs to be much more Leddie Brown early in games. Even if it's not going, you need to keep going to him and trying it out. And no matter what, Jarret Doege, 50 pass attempts, it's not going to work. His best pass of the day was the drop in the end zone. So again, the offense wasn't there. The offense wasn't enough, certainly after coming off of that big win where the offense definitely showed up against then-ranked number 16 Kansas State. And as I said on a recent show earlier in the week, as I said, it's on this Pittsburgh Sports Live channel. It's on the Mic Drop playlist here. It's over there in the Mic Drop section at WVU Sports Now. As I said on my personal Mic Drop show, for Neal Brown to show he's different than his predecessor, especially when his predecessor picked up big wins like that Orange Bowl win early in his tenure, something Neal Brown cannot do with the cover being so bare and having to truly rebuild this, Dana taking over a much better team at that point, that he needs to show he can get big wins and they can outnumber the bad losses. This is not a bad loss. It is a ranked Texas team, but a Texas offense that scored 20-plus points in every game this season with 59, 60-plus big numbers in most of these games this year, held to only 17 today. The offense didn't show up. The offense was not enough. Again, Mike Asti here on the Mountaineers post-game show here on Pittsburgh Sports Live and WV Sports Now. WVU now 4-3 on the year, losing today 17-13. I am here going to get this fired off here and then get this tweet fired off to promote this. Again, when you're doing these solo shows, a lot of this does fall on you. And then get my man Cody on to the broadcast here. Of course, Cody, again, our beat guy at WV Sports Now, and get his takes from really the strategy, the offensive game plan here, what maybe went on the sideline, the defense overall, of course, and just the rest of this season now for not only the Mountaineers, but also Texas, who now seems to be back in the Big 12 Conference Championship picture, to say the very least, even though I think we can all agree the Big 12 is out of the playoff picture, and that includes Texas with a couple losses, that nonetheless the Longhorns are back in vying for the chaos that is the Big 12 for that conference title. The offense just didn't do it. The offense was not enough. I do want to now welcome on Cody Nespor, who is our West Virginia beat guy. And Cody here, as we're connecting to the audio. Can you hear me, my man?
Yep. Hey, Mike.
Hey, what's going on? All right. Well, again, Cody Nespor here, WV Sports Now, joining us as the Mountaineers do lose today, 17-13, 4-3 now on the season. Cody, for me, the takeaway here is kind of a bit simpler than recent weeks and recent shows here, where the offense just didn't do enough. The offense didn't show up. The defense played really well. The defense certainly showed up when you're looking at allowing 17 to a Texas team that has scored 20 plus in every game this season, and even had games with 30 plus, 40 plus, 60 plus points. 17 today, it's hard to be too mad at the defense, but the offense didn't show up enough. Leddie Brown couldn't get going. Jarret Doege 50 pass attempts.
Right.
Is that all this game was for you? Anything else? What are your takeaways here?
I honestly don't think the offense was that bad. I don't think is the worst we've seen this offense play this year. You mentioned about Leddie. He doesn't get going, which, I don't think they want Jarret to have to throw 50 times, which I think he threw 51 in this game. But I honestly thought Jarret was a little sharper today than he has been.
Okay.
The big thing really is just those 2 fourth downs.
Right.
If they make one of those, they probably win the game.
That's true. For me, though, he missed a few other key throws. But yeah, it does go to the 4th down. And I think funny enough, and I saw a lot of people say this, one of the better throws that he's had all year, and certainly in this game, was the drop in the end zone. That was picture perfect.
The one to Winston, right?
Yeah, that didn't end up being points, and then getting sacked and just drilled and shot like a missile, I think was said on the broadcast on the next play, which ended up in 3 but not 7. And this game being so close, you don't know how things are going to roll out. Not only just Jarret Doege's play and missing some throws, because again, he's not expected to be Justin Fields or Trevor Lawrence out there. He probably did play well enough to lead a team to a win. 120 quarterback rating, 35 completion, 300 plus passing yards. Again, it's hard to be too mad at that. For me, though, the recipe in this game, if you don't even watch it and you look at the box score, and I watch as much as I can, except for when they took away the broadcast for me and took it off ESPN News and then didn't give it to the Pittsburgh market locally at all. But I'll digress on that. That 50 pass attempts for Jarret Doege, only 15 carries for Leddie Brown, that doesn't usually match to a Mountaineer victory.
No. I would say West Virginia's offense doesn't concern me. What concerns me is that Texas kind of showed teams today how to beat West Virginia's offense.
Okay.
Because what did Texas just kind of stacked the box and said, we'll take Leddie away. We'll let you throw it 50 times and just kind of see if you beat us that way. And it worked today for Texas, just kind of barely, but it did work. Leddie didn't get going. I know Neil just said that he's a little banged up, but he was healthy enough to play and he still had some good runs.
Yeah.
But that would, more so than West Virginia's offensive performance, what Texas did defensively concerns me a little bit more, because West Virginia's getting into a stretch now where they're going to start playing better defensive teams, Oklahoma, Iowa State. And if there's a blueprint now to kind of say this is all you need to do to beat West Virginia's offense, that's going to be trouble.
Yeah, it's going to be trouble to say the least. And obviously that TCU game looms there as what seems to be a victory for the Mountaineers, but nothing is guaranteed, obviously, with this team. And again, Cody Nespor here, Mike Asti on the West Virginia postgame show here for WVU Sports Now, and of course, Pittsburgh Sports Live. So give us a subscribe down there below on the button to make this easier for us to get our content to you guys and be alerted whenever we do go live. Also follow at WVU Sports Now on social. But it also appeared to be a situation where even though this was a close game, it felt like one of those games you knew the Mountaineers were going to lose. Just the way the game was unfolding, even when they were flirting with taking the lead or making this game close, they were never getting blown out in this game. This was close all the way through, and Texas certainly struggled at times. But it just felt like the Mountaineers never could get going with their full-on game plan. And as you mentioned, the schedule coming up, this maybe was that blueprint that last week Kansas State was not able to show, because even previewing that game, the whole conversation was really about with somebody covering Kansas State was they had been winning, but they hadn't faced a featured back. Once they faced a featured back, could they handle Leddie Brown and a featured back? Chuba Hubbard is who they're now facing. And they were not able to handle Leddie Brown, but Texas was. So Texas had that experience, and they were. Now flipping over to the defense before we get back to Leddie Brown and the offense for a second. What do you think the defense was able to do so well? It wasn't a victory, but this defense, who's played better than expectations this year after all the controversy of the offseason, it put up the best defensive effort against that Texas offense any team has put forth this season.
I was honestly surprised because I wrote about it this week, but West Virginia had, other than Charlie Brewer, they've only faced inexperienced quarterbacks, and not just like normal inexperienced, like guys who have never played before. And so I thought, this was Ellinger's 40th career start. I honestly thought that he would be a lot more trouble than he was. And I think that goes to show that I was just kind of underselling, and I feel like some other media people,
a lot of people,
have kind of been underselling how like actually dominantly good this West Virginia defense is. Because even if you look at it today, they didn't get a ton of sacks, they didn't turn the ball over, they still held Texas to 363 yards and, like you said, only 17 points. And they controlled the game for most of it. And even though they didn't get the stats,
and big stops, momentum shifting.
Oh yeah. Even though they didn't have the stats today, I think it's still the Stills brothers. If you just watch what they do up front, they stunt, they twist, they free up. Dylan Tonkery had 2 sacks today. They free up guys like that. They clog up the running lanes, and I think we know Ellinger's not a sit in the pocket and throw it kind of quarterback.
Right.
And they kind of took that away from him. And I think that's what they did really well. And that's why I think this defense is hard to beat, because there's no gimmick, right? It's not a scheme gimmick. It's, they don't do anything overly exotic. Right. They just kind of beat you up front and say, like, try your best, but we're just going to out-muscle you.
Yeah, to say the least. And the Still brothers, I know that they really want to do that. That's kind of what they say behind closed doors as their goal. This defense showed up and then some. And really, it may also speak to give credit where it's due, that maybe this defense, and I know that I was talking with a colleague of ours who covers Mountaineers, sits right there next to Tony Caridi for their weekly show, that the Mountaineers maybe were better than people expected even last year. Honestly, like the overall season wasn't what you'd want, but the defense wasn't all that bad if you really dissect the numbers. You get into this season, you don't have your defensive coordinator, you're kind of doing it by committee. It's just a recipe for the wheels to fall off. And I don't think anyone even would have been mad if the defense didn't perform this year with everything they dealt with. But it might be more than just picking up where they left off a season ago.
Right. Honestly, there's if the defense had been bad last year or had been, a little bit worse this year, they would have had, there's reasonable excuses for that, right? Like last year, Vic Koning's scheme is weird. It's a 3-3-5, 2-4-5 kind of hybrid. They had, a couple of guys transfer away right at the start of the year. They had,
injuries.
Some of their only returners were hurt. But like you said, they played pretty well last year. And then coming into this year, Koning's gone. They don't have a true defensive coordinator. The secondary is all new guys. So if they had struggled, the excuses are there.
Yeah.
But the excuses haven't been needed, right? They've been stellar. Jordan Leslie and Jamal Adai. I don't know if you can give like a joint coordinator of the year award, but they kind of earn it right now.
Hey, it's 2020.
Right. Oh yeah, might as well.
It's going to be a year. It's going to be a year to have. Yeah, it would be this year. Because it really is amazing. As much as this defense has played well, and they had the number 1 national ranking for a while, and while granted that was before the Big 12 and Pac-12 showed up to the party, right. It's still, again, as you're saying, it's better than expectations, because nobody would have been mad or would have thought it was weird if this defense is one of the worst in the country with everything they had to deal with. It's a veteran bunch, though. The Still brothers certainly leading the way, but I was still even surprised how well they played, even in this game, even knowing how good they could be, because 17 points for this Texas offense. And as you mentioned, Sam Ehlinger is an X factor that could give you a victory any given Saturday or any given day. He could be the reason why you win a game. And to even be fair to Kansas State, that's the biggest win under Neil Brown. But that was a quarterback that only had played a couple games. I mean, that was a Kansas State team that was dealing with an injury to their veteran, was then having a new quarterback to take over, and it was a similar offense, but kind of learning somebody else's offense, and eventually that being a problem with arguably the best defense he had faced to that point, really the only good defense he had faced to that point. Cody Nespor of WVU Sports, now Mike Asti here on the Mountaineers postgame show on Pittsburgh Sports Live. West Virginia losers, 17-13, so a close game, but a game I think we can agree, and it's kind of the way our world right now. It was a close game, a close race, but clearly leaning one way all the way through. That's kind of the result here for the Mountaineers, negatively for them. Now 4-3 on the year. Before I want to get to the rest of the season, and before I even want to touch on Texas now, who has really seemingly turned it around thanks to some chaos in the Big 12.
Mm-hmm.
I touched on this at the beginning of the show. I don't know if you heard, you heard me waiting on the line, but I do want to ask you what your thoughts are of Leddie Brown's, I don't want to call it an outburst, but just his emotional conversation with teammates and coaches on the sidelines. Because for me, and I think it was confused a lot on Twitter and on social media and amongst fans, with when they normally see that in sports, usually it is somebody having an outburst, and it usually is maybe a locker room divider. For me, there's a difference between a player trying to blame teammates and show up coaches versus somebody trying to motivate others and wanting to be better and really showing frustration. To me, that showed signs of Leddie Brown becoming a leader of this team. And to me, just seeing him mouth words, just watching, he was saying, I don't know what's going on. I want to be better. We got to figure this out. Go to me more. He didn't want them to abandon the run like they were doing for a while, where you see all these pass attempts. What's your take on what went on there? Because it's definitely being misunderstood. You don't normally see that out of Leddie Brown, and it maybe not a good look, but I kind of understand where he was coming from. And just the recipe there is in the pudding that they didn't get enough out of Leddie Brown today, but I don't know how much of that was actually his fault.
Yeah, I think I'm with you where I like it, right? Because as competitive as Leddie is, I would want him to be frustrated in a game like this. A game where he's not at 100%, as Neil Brown said, and he's not having a good game, and the running game isn't having a good game, and the offense isn't scoring a ton of points. I wouldn't want him to just calmly sit on the sidelines and be like, yeah, whatever. I would want him to be upset. I would want him to be, maybe not yelling at guys, but talking to the other teammates. And I do agree with you. I think that's a good sign of a leader. We see, I think it was last year, the year before, we saw Tom Brady have a massive
if it was a quarterback
on the sideline.
Right.
Yeah. But no, and then the one thing that I can't view that as something negative for Leddie is because all season he's always said he's taking West Virginia's rushing success personally this season. He's putting it all on himself, saying if we're going to succeed, it's on me. If we're going to fail, it's on me. And so that I can't view that and be like, oh, he's blaming other people or he's, Matt, I just can't view that from what I know of Leddie and from what I've heard him say.
Yeah, he's definitely putting his money where his mouth is, metaphorically speaking, in terms of he's willing to take the blame, even if really it's not his fault in a way as well. And I think it's pretty clear, and this goes back to your blueprint, which might be negative for this team, that if you stop Leddie Brown, you're probably beating the Mountaineers. And
it's at least a better chance.
It's a much better chance. Yeah, there's more weapons there than last year. And Jarret Doege, despite his faults, has certainly emerged as being a better quarterback option than Austin Kendall a season ago. But Leddie Brown makes Jarret Doege even better. You could see towards the end of the game, once the Mountaineers realized Leddie Brown was not going to have a day, and the defense realized it too for Texas, they were able to just bring the heat to Jarret Doege, and he really wasn't able to do much the latter half of this game, and you lose by 4. So that certainly could be an issue that resulted in a Mountaineer loss in this game. And that's going to be a problem. That's something Neil Brown certainly has to work on to get them more one-dimensional. Maybe there's nothing else you can do, but I did love it. I thought he's becoming a leader. I think it is just odd to have a team in this day and age in football, whether it be college or pro, where the locker room leader is the running back and where the best player is the running back and where the offense moves off the running back. It almost feels like old school football a little bit, even though he's more dynamic. So it's a concern. But if it was Tom Brady, even if it was Jarret Doege, I think everyone would think he's such a great leader. So that perception might be part of it, that it's being a running back. It's a bit weird. That might be a concern for this offense moving forward, though, that they're so hinged on the running back. But again, I don't think everyone, if you aren't following the Mountaineers for a while, and I know you know this, you don't understand how bad the running game was a season ago.
Yes.
I mean, it was literally, and I am not exaggerating or throwing a Mike Asti hot take out there, it was one of the worst in the country.
I believe it was the second worst Power 5 running attack. And the
Yeah.
worst was like Washington State, who doesn't run the ball.
Right. It was really, really, really bad. Leddie Brown almost single-handedly getting that Mountaineer rushing game over the overall yardage a couple weeks ago with how bad that running game was. I do think, though, the offensive line had a poor day today as well, which leads to Leddie Brown not getting going, leads to the pass attempts for Jarret Doege not being as successful as maybe they should.
Yeah, I thought the right side of the line was kind of brutal today, and not even it seemed like it was kind of dumb mistakes.
Yeah.
Like a couple of at least one of the passes that was batted down, Mike Brown, the right guard, just whiffed on a guy, and he just got right in Doege's face and batted the pass down. And then John Hughes, he really had kind of a bad day. He got beat a ton, it seemed, by their pass rusher.
Right.
And that was even with Texas's top defensive tackle went out early, and even without him, they still kind of tossed the offensive line around a little bit. But overall, it has been way better than last year. I don't think.
Again, how high is the bar, though?
Right, yeah. But I mean, if we're just saying improvement, at the very least, improvement, yeah, it was still better than what we saw last year. But yeah, probably the worst performance of the year so far. And like I said, that right side really did not play well.
No, it did not. And I think here, this also will be a nice segue into my show of the week, my personal show of the week, and kind of what I touched on coming off of the big win last week and then leading into what could have been another big win this week that was not, the bad loss of a couple of weeks ago. Yes, it's absolutely fair to say, and you got to say it, this team has significantly improved with mostly the same roster from this year to last year. Absolutely. And that has to go to the coaching staff. The cupboard was kind of bare for Neil Brown last year a little bit. Certainly different than when Dana Holgorsen took over. Dana Holgorsen got a big Orange Bowl victory over Clemson early on in his tenure, which can stick out as his main success of that point. So the rest of the way where it was big wins and bad losses, he could at least say that I have that Orange Bowl. I have a trophy in the case there for the Mountaineers for history. Neil Brown doesn't have that. His biggest win still is the regular season win against Kansas State last week. Mm-hmm. I don't think a big bowl win is coming probably in the next year or so that will be a stain for him. But the cupboard was bare and there's big improvement. However, for his tenure to be different than his predecessor, he needs big wins to outnumber the bad losses. Unfortunately, he's 1-1 this year. Yes, Kansas State, big win, number 16 team in the country. Even losing this game close, no one's going to be too mad. It's a ranked Texas team that's been winning with several wins in a row. But the Texas Tech loss is bad. If they finish a game out of the Big 12 title game this year, you're going to point to that game and say that's why, and that's a Dana Holgorsen style bad loss they shouldn't have lost. For you, where are you on your perception of Neil Brown? Because I think most media and fans do like him and feel like he's a fit, but how much rope do you think he's going to have with this program? And when do you think there might be a little bit of the conversation of kind of what I'm saying, that these bad losses are still in the mind of Mountaineer fans, and it does not appear that anything had changed on that regard? I mean, he's a nice guy. They're winning. It feels like he's a fit, and they're turning things around talent-wise. But the record, it's just seemingly still the same as what it was the last few years of Dana Holgorsen. And at some point, something has to give. It can't just be that way forever, even though they're giving him rope. So
if I'm Shane Lyons, I give Neil Brown as much rope as he wants until he proves to me that he isn't the guy. Because like the Texas Tech class this year and last year, the Texas Tech loss was awful.
Right.
2 very bad losses. But I think in every game, in every media availability, in everything, I think Neil has either done or said, the right thing, if you want to, objectively the right thing, or at least what he felt he needed to do. What sticks out to me every time we talk to Neil Brown is just how genuine he seems in everything he says. You know what I mean? And there are some college coaches out there who, they're talking to you and it's like, okay, but what do you really think? Okay, they're playing their cards because
you should try to discuss Pat Narduzzi on some of these pitch shows I do with Alan. He literally lies. He's just flat out lying to us.
But that's why. So if I'm Shane Lyons, I give Neil rope until he proves to me that he doesn't deserve it anymore. But I do know I saw fans today that want Jared Parker fired. And one, firing an offensive coordinator in his first year is just stupid. There's nothing there. And then 2, to look at just the progress, and we can talk about the big wins, but to look at just the progress, how much better the team looks this year than last year. I mean that to me, not as good as like an Orange Bowl win, but it's something very positive. Like, especially for Mountaineer fans, why are you looking a gift horse in the mouth? It's like, oh, we lost to Texas Tech. Neil Brown's awful. Short lease. It's like, are you not watching? You don't see the massive improvement from last year.
Yeah.
Like, it's going to take time. Neil Brown has never had a Power 5 head coaching job before. He's only ever been the head coach at Troy. You hire him for the potential that, okay, he built a winner at Troy. Can that translate into the Big 12? It's a lottery ticket. It's not a 1 to 1,000 odds lottery ticket. You hope it's a little better than that, but it's a lottery ticket. And I get why fans are upset with bad losses, but if you think big picture, don't pull the plug after a year or two or three or a bad loss. You can get mad at him, you can argue his decisions, but I don't want to be like I'm drinking the Kool-Aid, but there is some credence to trust the climb.
No, and trust the climb is there, and trust the climb is a phrase that's so wonderful for West Virginia, but it also does really, really fit the Neil Brown tenure. Mm-hmm. I will say, as much as trust the climb fits the Neil Brown tenure, and as much as in no way are they going to, I should clarify that, they're not. Shane Lyons is very much in lockstep with Neil Brown. For everything I've heard, you've heard, that's just the fact. They're not going to be getting rid of him this year, next year. I don't know if I want to give as much rope as you're saying, though. I mean, at some point, something has to give. I think that one thing that's benefiting him that was not there with Dana Holgorsen, to just be blunt, he seems to care a lot more what people think in terms of being a good guy. Not to say Dana's a bad person,
right?
But he is friendlier with media members. I even remember his opening media session this year, taking the first minute to just say, I know a lot of you were here with me last year. You're not here with me this year because of a pandemic. Sorry for you, and then reach out to them. That's not something that you would have felt like was occurring in the previous tenure. Even speaking with Mountaineer greats, I was trying to do just random shows and during the quarantine with Mike Logan. Mm-hmm. I mean, he was talking about he had literally not received a phone call from WVU to invite him to a game the entire previous tenure. He's already received one numerous weeks from Neil Brown, and they probably had never met before. So that's a big deal. That certainly is going to buy you room with media who are going to try to help you in a way. They're not going to be as hard. It's just reality. It's going to buy room with fans, boosters, etc. They're going to give more room for that. But eventually, the big wins are going to have to be there more than the bad losses. And I would say if at the end of next season, they still come out of next year with like a 7-6 season or something, and you're having a bad loss to a non-ranked team force you into that very poor bowl game or maybe not getting into one at all, then that conversation is going to have to be, Neil, we're going to at some point here have to do more on the field, even though he's coming from Troy and understanding that scenario.
Right.
Because while he's rebuilding and the cupboard's bare and you bring him in to trust the climb, he does not have the major resume piece that Dana at least could cling to when people were criticizing him. Neil Brown cannot say, I beat number 16 Kansas State 2 years from now as his only big win. There's going to have to be more on that resume.
The thing for me that would concern me is if next year in his fourth, or if he gets to a fifth year, is if there are still kind of massive holes on the team. Obviously in his first year, you can't fault him for that, but there were massive holes on the team. This year, I think you can look, as good as the defense has played, if there's not a lot of depth, there's a lot of holes depth-wise, and then offensively, there's still not – I would say there's still no star power other than Leddie having his breakout year.
We thought Winston Wright earlier in the season, but it doesn't appear to be that way.
Yeah. So I think if, in his third, fourth, fifth year, there are still massive holes on the roster and huge issues with the team, then I think that's when there are some serious concerns. But, in year two and year three, he, as long as he's only got, a recruiting class or two, it's all about development, right? And I think he's done a good job so far with development of what he got. And if you look, Doege's a guy he brought in, right?
Yeah. We learned all of it a couple weeks ago with their relationship from when he was 12 years old. Yeah.
So it's even stuff like that is, this team already kind of feels like it's Neil's a little bit, but let him get some classes in and see how he kind of does when he can recruit his own guys and develop his own guys. But yeah, if there are still huge concerns with the team, if they're not beating if they're making no ground in the Big 12, well, then it's a problem.
Yeah, I mean, eventually it would be, but I think it's player development and it's recruiting. Obviously, in that early tenure, certainly Neil Brown comes off to me as somebody that's certainly can sit in a kid's living room and recruit him. I think parents would be comfortable with them going to school and playing under Neil Brown, certainly in this climate. And he certainly has a track record that this Mountaineer job made sense for him. It seemed to be a natural progression for his individual career success at Troy, getting a major job, and Mountaineer level seems to have made sense for him. So if he has too much, maybe Mountaineer fans should think of it this way: if it's a normal progression, you'll get him for what he thought to be and what he said to be a long time in his career. If it was a Dana Holgorsen success years 1 and year 2, he'd probably get a better job by this point and be gone. So maybe this is actually better. And again, to be fair to him, the cupboard was certainly bare in comparison to what Dana Holgorsen took over at that point. That really has to be said, to be fair to Neil Brown here. Cody Nespor of WV Sports Now, all that post-game coverage that he put up is over there at WV Sports Now. Of course, Mike Asti. West Virginia losing 17-13, now 4-3 on the year here on Pittsburgh Sports Live. Cody, I do want to transition now to, before we get to the Mountaineers' rest of their season, to Texas. Unlike Neil Brown and the Mountaineers, year 2, some of our colleagues even called Neil Brown last year 0, and this being year 1. So there's still rope here. He's being given time to rebuild things. Unlike him with the Mountaineers, Texas is in year 4 of a regime. And Texas clearly has a lot more pressure on them because of the money and the national prestige and Vince Young having been there, that they feel like they should even be at a higher level and be an elite program and shouldn't even have these 2 losses that are already there and are still those issues still being there for this Texas team. But from what you've seen now from Texas in recent weeks, certainly today, the fact they've now strung several wins together, they do have that Oklahoma loss, which sticks in their craw, I'm sure, with the vulnerable OU team. But looking at the chaos that is the Big 12, what do you think of Texas the rest of the way? Do they have a shot at the Big 12 title now all over again when some called them for dead and called them hypocrites for the whole "we're back" a few weeks ago? But they have seemingly revitalized themselves to be right back in the race.
Yeah, I definitely think they have a shot. I still think it's Oklahoma State's to lose, even though Texas beat them last week. I still think Oklahoma State would be my favorite to win, but I think Texas definitely has a shot.
Okay.
And I know people have kind of been ragging on the Big 12 this year because they're beating each other up. Right. But the reason that the teams are beating each other up is because there's a decent number of good teams in the league this year.
Sure.
I think Oklahoma State's probably the best, but I wouldn't put them that far ahead of Texas. And even Oklahoma looked, kind of bad in the first few games, but, a freshman quarterback and all that stuff. Oklahoma's looked pretty good. Iowa State looks pretty good now. If Kansas State still had Skylar Thompson, they would definitely still be in the mix. I don't know with the true freshman quarterback, but I think a lot of the Big 12 teams are about in the same kind of tier of talent this season. So I definitely think it's going to be a dogfight the last 3 weeks, and I think everybody kind of has a shot. I wouldn't be surprised if it was Oklahoma State, Texas. I wouldn't be surprised if Oklahoma snuck in. I wouldn't be surprised if Iowa State got in. There's, almost half the league, I would estimate, would have a decent argument to get in, judging on the last 3 weeks of the season. And touching on Tom Herman real quick.
Yeah.
I kind of view him the same way I view Harbaugh, just in that it seems like they're good coaches, right? They get enough wins. They're ranked every year. They just can't get over the hump. And for programs like Texas and West Virginia, not getting over the hump gets you on the hot seat. Yeah. Michigan, yeah. Gets you on the hot seat quite often, right? It seems like every season we're like, oh, is Tom Herman on the hot seat? Is Tom Herman going to get fired? Is Harbaugh on the hot seat? Is Harbaugh going to get fired?
Yeah.
And I would it just kind of feels like with Ehlinger set to graduate, I mean, unless he came back, which I guess he could. But that would be interesting if Ehlinger came back again.
They'd have more talent coming next year. They might be able to have a special year if he comes back, to be honest with you.
But it kind of feels like if Ehlinger leaves, it kind of feels like this would be the time for Tom Herman to be like, all right, so Sam Ehlinger's gone. He's not your crutch anymore. What are you going to do now?
Right.
But yeah, I kind of view him the same way as Harbaugh.
That's a definitely fair comparison. The only thing I will say in Tom Herman's defense is Harbaugh's been in Michigan longer.
True,
Jim Harbaugh has a much bigger contract.
That's
Jim
Harbaugh
came from the NFL and had a Super Bowl appearance, so there was more hype and it was more reasonable hype coming into his Michigan tenure. And I think the expectations around Jim Harbaugh's tenure at Michigan was even greater than Tom Herman's tenure at Texas. When you think about it, Texas was going off a decade of mediocrity prior to him coming, even though the national title was right before that. Right. Michigan, they just think so much of themselves and that they should be in the national title picture all the time, that having 2 losses every year, maybe even 3 or 4 some years, and never beating your rival, it's almost shocking they haven't fired him to this point. I mean, honestly, because he's been there so long, he's getting so much money. That might be part of it too, but eventually something has to give. And if you only bring him in to be a national powerhouse, you're clearly not. You're a middle of the road program. It's just not worked out to this point. I'm sure he'll get some other gig, but I'm shocked he's still there. So that's a decent comparison, though.
I think, and you touched on it, not beating your rival. I think that's part of it is that Michigan gets compared to Ohio State, and obviously Ohio State has been, other than Alabama and Clemson, they've been
a different level.
One of the programs to beat in the whole country. And I feel like Texas gets that with Oklahoma.
Yeah,
where Texas fans every year they have a good team, a top 25 team, a team that goes to a good bowl, but they have to look over their shoulder at their rival and see Oklahoma in the college football playoff.
I think the issue
is Heisman's, all this stuff.
I think the issue is, Cody, and talking with one of the writers this week, they feel like that this was the year they had to beat OU. Because yes, you're normally appear lower than OU. Even looking at conference titles, Texas, think of this fact for bar trivia. Texas has only won the Big 12 3 times in the last 30 years. That sounds mind-boggling because one of the times has Vince Young as a number 1 overall pick. I mean, that year just they were going to beat everybody. So really only 2 other times. Oklahoma, just a myriad of opportunities, granted only 1 national title over those times, but being so close in the playoff every year recently, it's okay to be a tier lower than them the way Oklahoma's been performing. As a coach who didn't have the experience, certainly, for Tom Herman, but this was a rebuilding year for Oklahoma to where Lincoln Riley before the season was even saying, I'm not expecting a playoff out of this Oklahoma team, and then you still lose to them. So it feels like this was the missed opportunity to finally snag that win that's not there. And I would actually I don't normally read the Austin American Statesman, but I might this weekend because I do kind of want to see what's in there, because I was told off the air that if Texas lost this game, Brian was basically going to call for Tom Herman to be fired. So we'll see here. And as you're speaking on the Big 12 conference, if as much as we're talking about Neil Brown's future, if West Virginia could have won this game, they would have been right in that Big 12 championship picture. Yeah. And really, if some chaos happens, they're still somehow in there. They certainly would need to beat Iowa State and Oklahoma, and they never seem to can beat OU either. But they're not totally out of things either. Speaking on West Virginia here the rest of the way, Cody Nespor of WVU Sports Now, Mike Asti here on the Mountaineers postgame show here on PSL. Again, clicking the subscribe button, bottom of the video. Follow us on social. Mountaineers now 4-3 on the year, losing today 17-13. What do you expect out of WVU the rest of the way? They clearly have a winnable game with TCU coming. They have another bye week that I'm going to enjoy. We got a lot of bye weeks this year.
Yeah.
Oklahoma, who unfortunately, you're basically talking about it, they're playing them at the worst time. It's a vulnerable OU team, but they're really getting better and going to be good then. And then Iowa State, who WVU seemingly never can beat since being in the Big 12. If they get those wins, they could turn this year into above expectations and into kind of a year ahead of schedule. If they lose, say, 2 of those 3 games, people are going to be able to point to the record of Neil Brown's great, but this record's not there, and then we're needing next year to turn it around. But how do you see that season ending? Because if we were talking last week, they played to their expectations. Maybe they could have a special year. This week, the offense doesn't seem to be there. The defense is. It's been a roller coaster ride, but there's still room to make this a season of note with the chaos that's around them.
Right. I think you got it perfectly right. The time to play Oklahoma's was weeks 1 through 4 when Rattler was just so careless with the football and just chucking it up there and getting intercepted a bunch.
Right.
And now we've seen him mature week to week to where now he's very protective of the football, making very smart plays. I still, because of the West Virginia's defense, I view all 3 games as winnable. TCU, I would expect them to go in, West Virginia to go in as the favorite.
That can't be a loss, I feel like, or that's going to go back to what I was saying about Neil Brown.
It might be a reverse of last season, where last season they won 2 of the last 3. Doege had just started playing, and it was you felt good after last year, even though they didn't get a bowl game, but they won 2 out of the last 3. They showed a bunch of improvement. This year could almost be the inverse, where they've played pretty well so far, but if say they lose 2 of these last 3, or if they just if they lose to Oklahoma and then Iowa State's a good team, if they lose to Iowa State and they lose the last 2, you're probably feeling pretty bad, to where it's once upon a time we were 4-2 and playing well, and now we finished with a 500 record and we're going to play, I don't know, some bowl game in Montana or something.
Yeah, they'll get something because of COVID this year, but still, it depends on what it is. It'll be the different story. Yeah, I think that's a concern. Do you have a prediction there with those 3? Are you saying that lose?
They're just so tough because it's, to me, Oklahoma is the hardest team to kind of peg this year, just because they've been very dominant. But then they have some games, and it's not all on Rattler. I don't want to, paint him with a bad brush or anything. Yeah. But they've had some games where it's just like, this is a Lincoln Riley team? What are they doing? Just mistakes we haven't seen them make the last 3 years. So that's a tough game for me to kind of predict. I don't think it'll be a blowout like last year. TCU, I think the expectation would be for West Virginia to beat them, just because they haven't had a great year. And then Iowa State, honestly, is a pretty good game to end the year on. I think those 2 teams match up well. I really like Brock Purdy as a quarterback. I think that would be a very good quarterback battle between him and Doege. And Breece Hall and Leddie Brown are the 2 leading rushers in the league. Yeah. So I think that's going to be a very fun game to end the year on. Unless it's going to be a 4th loss in a row for the Mountaineers. Otherwise, it's not going to be fun.
No, but I've learned this on the Steelers side. Sometimes the business would work well with it either being really, really bad or really, really good.
Right.
Last year, with how that season went, we were able to turn numbers, and it was far from greater than this year being an undefeated team. But yeah, so I mean, you never know. I'm you hate to lean towards losing 2 of those 3. The TCU game almost has to be a win. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't be shocked if they lose to I would be more surprised if they beat Oklahoma, and maybe that's just me knowing the history of the recent battles between those 2 teams. But Iowa State's been a better team most of the year, so we'll see. Yeah. They're ending their season on a harder note than Texas is, for example, than a lot of other programs. So if they're going to somehow get back in the Big 12 title picture, it'll be tougher on them than it would be other teams. And yes, they have a bye week included, so that's also going to be tougher to get another win. They've already got to their kind of plateau right now. We'll see. Obviously, the Mountaineers lose today. This is not necessarily by any means a bad loss, but next week certainly has to be a win for the Mountaineers to kind of progress forward. It almost feels like one maybe they let get away with how well this defense played. Cody, I definitely appreciate you jumping on here. Certainly while you were covering this game as well for us, pulling double duty for the Mountaineers here today for the coverage. Anything in terms of predicting or foreshadowing maybe what you got going on the site here coming up based on what you've seen on the field today and what you're thinking to cover coming up this week?
Well, I'm definitely I'm going to write a piece. Neil Brown is an aggressive play caller. He has no qualms about going on it on 4th down. He's talked about it before. He showed it today. Those 2 4th downs, which in hindsight, you kick the 2 field goals, you win the game. But, you don't have hindsight. And after you fail on the first one, you're forced to go on the second one.
Well, we do. We're analyzing the game. We can.
So I'm definitely going to write Neil Brown's aggressive play calling. And then the standout player for me today was Isaiah Esdale, who has not played a lot this year. And just he was a little physically dominant today against the Texas corners. Neil talked a little bit about him. He's an interesting guy to me. He played well last year in a very limited role, and he hasn't gotten a lot of run this year, but he played very well today. And then the red zone offense. I see people complaining about West Virginia's offense. and I think people just assume that the red zone offense is bad because it usually, if you have a bad offense, it usually is. West Virginia's red zone offense is like immaculate.
Yeah, once they get in there, they're fine.
Yeah,
generally speaking.
I think they're 20. I might get the number wrong. I think they're 29 for 29 on scoring. So I'm definitely
in terms of some points. You mean including a field
in
goal?
terms of just getting points, which is phenomenal. And so I'm definitely going to write about that. Just to not a little bit, just to clear the record, because I feel like there's an incorrect perception about West Virginia's red zone offense.
Yeah, no, and I will say you're factually correct, but sometimes the facts don't tell the whole story because only having 13 points today, getting down in the red zone and settling for field goals and getting too many field goals instead of touchdowns, including that we talked about it earlier, the drop in the end zone. You leave that possession with 3 points. Not 6 or 7. You have 7. You tie this game based on this current score. So that's definitely a part of it. That's definitely a big deal. That's definitely kind of what's held the offense back from having those gaudy scoring numbers on these scoreboards. But the offense has been better than some people realize. And I also think, to be fair, and it's just naturally fitting into mold of criticizing what you see in front of you. This offense, this running game, this team, Jarret Doege, everything, as you're saying, it is light years from where it was last year. There's tons of improvement. There could be even more improvements to next year. So maybe we're even a year ahead of schedule to really fairly criticize this team. With or without COVID, I think this was kind of going to be one of those years where you just wanted to see some improvement on the field, regardless of record. And that is happening, even though maybe the record's not where you'd like, and they are squandering some opportunities. Generally speaking, this offense, even without the points, has shown they're way better for marching up and down the field than they were a season ago. So
I'm just gonna say, and of course, we're getting into basketball season now.
Yes.
We're starting to talk to Huggins a little bit more, so we're gonna have that all over the site next couple of weeks, and then the season starts. The season's kind of creeping up on us.
Yeah, that is kind of crazy. I don't know if I'm ready for it, but I love hearing from Huggins, and we're also going to have those Huggins videos here on Pittsburgh Sports Live. So yeah, Huggins with his really, really ominous backdrop there. Huggins is getting ready. He's already throwing the comments and the tea leaves out there on what he expects out of the team, on what he thinks out of the season, what he thinks the team can achieve this year, how they're going to do it. He's predicting in terms of how good or bad they'd be as a shooting team. So Huggins is ready. Huggins is basically in mid-season form from what I'm seeing from Huggins. So get excited. It seems like he's been raring, ready to go here during quarantine to get started here coaching this team. And there are expectations around this Mountaineer basketball team for sure. And I know a lot of these writers I've talked to in opposing teams coming into this football season, they've all said they come back on for basketball season. So that could really make things interesting here for a coverage for basketball season as well. Again, there for Cody Nespor, for all of us throughout the Now family of networks, for us here on Pittsburgh Sports Live, I'm Mike Asti. The Mountaineers losers today, a close race that just clearly was leaning one way, kind of the story of the day and story of the weekend really in our world, but certainly also for the West Virginia Mountaineers.